In 1987, Hudson Soft and NEC Home Electronics joined forces to bring out the PC Engine, or what was later known as the TurboGrafx in other parts of the world. It took Japan by storm, selling extremely well and even giving the immense popularity of Nintendo's Famicom a run for a few years. As 1989 came into focus, it was no secret that Nintendo was developing a brand new 16-bit system to unleash upon the industry. SNK was also hard at work on a new system called the Neo Geo, and Sega had launched a brand new 16-bit system in Japan the year prior called the Mega Drive. These new systems all represented a threat to the PC Engine's success, so Hudson Soft and NEC set out to develop a true 16-bit successor called the PC Engine 2 and release it in 1990. Something would go horribly wrong during development, however. Instead of a successor to the PC Engine, the Supergrafx was born. It was released early and dropped in November of 1989. The Supergrafx was actually built on top of the technology of the PC Engine itself. It added more RAM and some additional graphics chips that boosted things like background layers. This modest upgrade over the original hardware also came in exceptionally expensive, roughly $400. As if that wasn't bad enough, each of the games for the platform commanded a premium at retail as well, costing upwards of $100 per title. Needless to say, the Japanese market balked immediately at the pricing and technology proposition here, and it and its games sold terribly. It didn't help that only one game launched with the system, Battle Ace, and another didn't show up until 4 months later. The reception was so cold that NEC and Hudson abandoned the platform almost immediately, and only 5 dedicated game titles were ever produced for it. Despite the fact that the Supergrafx was fully backwards compatible with the PC Engine, the price was too high, the software was too few, and the enhancements ultimately not strong enough to justify its lofty price tag. When the Supergrafx launched in November of 1989, one single game was released with it, called Battle Ace. This is a forward-scrolling shoot-'em-up that puts you in mind of something like G-Lock with a touch of Galaxy Force 2 mixed in. Vulcan cannons and lock-on missiles are your ordnance of choice, and you'll need to shoot down many an enemy to complete each stage. Battle Ace here is a decent-looking game. The scaling sprites are fairly impressive, though the environments are a little on the plain side. Most of the visuals here are flat and sparse, though you do get the occasional column to dodge here and there. The music in this one is a highlight for me, as it's quite good, a fun mix of upbeat and fast melodies that pairs well with the shooting action. Overall, it's quite the average affair though, and since it was the only game available for months on the brand new $400 machine, you can imagine what Japanese gamers were thinking. The system needed a killer app, or at the very least multiple decent games to make a solid impression of its potential. With Battle Ace here, it got neither. The next game that was released on the Supergrafx was Granzort in April of 1990, a full 4 months after the release of the Supergrafx system. Fortunately for new adopters, this was a much better effort than Battle Ace. This was a mech-based action platformer with some very decent visuals and music. Oh man, was it hard though. Without any power-ups, it was a one-hit wonder, and could frustrate the hell out of you quickly. I remember hating this when I first tried it, and played it for hours before I even realized the game was a lot deeper than I had given it credit for. Hitting the run button actually cycles through various mech forms that give you different powers. You can fly, deploy a shield, and they all have different weapon types. This increased my enjoyment incredibly and actually makes this one quite enjoyable once you get a feel for what form works best in any given situation. The aforementioned graphics and sound here really don't give you the impression that it couldn't have been done on the vanilla PC Engine, despite the colorful and impressively detailed sprites. She's a tough one with solid gameplay though, and well worth investigating. 3 months after Granzort was released, we got perhaps the most well-recognized game on the platform, Daimakaimura, in July of 1990. Retailing for over $100, this really was the first game for the system that made people take notice. Ghouls'n had been a popular arcade game in pretty much every region, and there had been a strong port of it on the Japanese Mega Drive. Could it be possible that the mighty Supergrafx would finally shine and show us what it was capable of? Well, yes and no. First, this was an excellent representation of the source. I mean, the color is gorgeous, the background's detailed, and the enemies plentiful and well animated. It even sounds great, reproducing the arcade tunes with a strong and unique variance that you couldn't help but admire. The gameplay is just as strong, and you'll find all the responsiveness you need to put up a good fight. And you'll need it too, because the classic difficulty is here in full effect. Side by side, it puts up a strong showing against the Mega Drive version, and even beats it in a few areas like better color and less sprite flicker. However, the Supergrafx was a $400 console, and its version of the game was over $100. This means that adjusted for inflation, that's like a console today that costs nearly $800 with a $200 game, basically put up a good fight against a PlayStation 4 in one of its games. The disparity in cost really hurt the game's impact at the time, despite the translation being quite excellent. The Supergrafx was unable to build on the strong showing of Dyma Kai Mora because its next game didn't show up until February of 1991, over 6 months later, in the form of Aldynes. This horizontal shooter came with a ton of expectation from me, as the early adopters were absolutely starving for content for the Supergrafx. So how was it? Well, they really nailed a few features that took advantage of some of the hardware in the Supergrafx. You get some really nice parallax effects, and I freaking love the music in this game. The enemy ships look okay, and there are a few power-ups that have cool effects. The biggest problem with this one is the gameplay. Much of the screen stays empty far more often than it should, and there are long droughts of power-ups that leads to enemies just dogging you while you basically run for your life. This includes the lack of speed increases, which makes a hell of a difference on certain stages. Running on your ship's base speed is like crawling away from a Terminator. It's not fun. This imbalance really hammers the fun factor later in the game, making it a chore to play and, quite frankly, just not fun. This is a shame because it has a great shield mechanic and a fair bit of versatility in the use of satellites, but you can't enjoy a feature if you hardly see the damn things. Another big negative was the complete lack of a two-player mode, something that was a staple of 2D shooters at the time. This was another $100 game for the Supergrafx, and while it has its moments, it's just not anywhere near the game it needs to be. The very last game released for the Supergrafx was the much-anticipated port of the popular Capcom arcade shoot-'em-up 1941 Counterattack. I'm going to come clear here and just let you know up front I suck at these games. I have never been good at them. The constant rush of enemies from behind you and the anemic power-ups have always frustrated me to the point where I simply can't take much of it. So if you enjoy this type of game, know that my opinion is quite skewed to the negative in this regard. From an audio and visual standpoint, however, there is much to appreciate here. The color usage is bold and beautiful, and there are a ton of enemies on screen at any given time. There are also some nice layering effects with the backdrops, and the music and sound effects all sound great, except when that damn low energy alarm is drowning everything out. It did the system proud and was a good game to add to the meager Supergrafx library. Unfortunately, it had been nearly 2 years since the system had launched, and this would be its 5th and final game. There were two releases for the PC Engine that featured advertising that they could be enhanced by the Supergrafx console. Darius Plus was a port of the well-known title arcade game. The difference between running this on a vanilla PC Engine and a Supergrafx is virtually indistinguishable 99% of the time. Here and there, mainly on the bosses, the Supergrafx version eliminates sprite flicker that pops up. Otherwise, this is very much the same experience and nothing special to show off the features of the machine. There was also a special version of the game called Darius Alpha that is much more rare. It was basically a boss rush version of Darius Plus and has the same limited enhancements. I imported the Supergrafx during its brief life back in the early 1990s, drawn to the promise of great arcade ports. During this time, there were two games well known to be in development for the platform that I absolutely had to have. The first was the Capcom arcade classic Strider. This was a high-profile game that you would find in game magazines that covered imports, and you'd often see it as coming soon at import shops that sold the platform. Unfortunately, while in development, it was cancelled for the Supergrafx and moved entirely to being a PC Engine game. Then that version was axed in favor of a game that would use the brand spanking new arcade card and come on CD. This final version was released in late 1994 as Twilight descended upon the platform. It had additional content over the arcade original, yet still lacked the visual fidelity to unseat the Mega Drive version as my favorite console port. There was also a cancelled port of Galaxy Force 2 for the Supergrafx. You are all well aware of the tall order this presented. Galaxy Force 2 had been a cutting-edge superscalar arcade game that used Sega's incredibly powerful Y board. I was intrigued, however, because the Supergrafx had the extra sprite-pushing ability to perhaps do this port proud. The poor Mega Drive version had been point-blank butchered, and the Master System game was entirely different. Given the history of Sega's games on the PC Engine, I was hopeful the end result would be something special. And of course it never happened. The project was cancelled and wasn't moved to the base PC Engine or any of its CD add-ons. The story behind the Supergrafx is easily summed up. Its hardware and software were too expensive, its games library non-existent, and its promise unfulfilled. History would quickly leave the platform in the dust, and it was forgotten as a new generation of 3D polygon hardware began hitting the market. But it was far worse being an actual Supergrafx owner back then. To invest such a huge amount of money into a platform, only to see so few software releases that were spread so far apart and so expensive, had been a ride I honestly wish I hadn't taken. That's not to say I didn't enjoy some of the games I did get for the platform, but with so few of them and the cancellation of Strider, it was all one hell of a bitter pill to swallow. While I can't in good conscience recommend you buy a platform that only has 5 games for it, I can say you should definitely play those games via other means. You'll find a couple of really good arcade ports, as well as a couple of solid exclusives. The Supergrafx's true potential was never reached, and all we have left are the woulda, coulda, and shoulda conversations of what might have been. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.